Welcome back to Agility Summit. It's been a great day until now. We've learned a lot of things, and now it's time to look into how can people who are involved in various roles in an organization help with the transition, with the transformation. We have with us Greg Hunchins, who is an expert in new product development, organizational improvement, including lean thinking, innovation games. Greg is focused on agility and innovation, and we've worked with Greg in one of our first, I think one of the first transformations that we were involved in as Mosaic Works, and it's been a great experience and very interesting to work with him. So welcome, Greg, and you have the stage.
Thank you very much. Well, it's wonderful to be with you all virtually. I'd love to see you and do some kind of a social graph or other interactive exercise. I'm a very active facilitator normally. So let's see how I can make this interesting for you during an online session where I'm primarily broadcasting. During this talk, I want to save some time for questions and discussion, which will come towards the end. So in the next 30 minutes, I'll go through experience that I have and thoughts I have around business agility, adaptability, and change. I hope everybody's doing well today. So a little bit about me. This picture, you can probably tell it's a bit out of date because the little girl that I'm holding there, my daughter Sophie, is now 13 years old. So she's not actually that small. She's actually bigger now. She's almost as tall as I am, believe it or not. What I do is I coach and train organizations in Lean and Agile. And I've been involved in software product development for about 40 years, so quite a long time. I work at a company that I founded 5 years ago. And in the work that we did together with Mosaic Works, it was actually when I was still working at Valtech. I ran the global Agile services at Valtech for several years out of Paris, working internationally. And we had a very long and interesting transformation at Alcatel-Lucent. In any case, the mission of my company, Amelia Services, is to increase happiness for our clients and their customers. And Sophie is really at the top of my product backlog. She's my pride and joy. And if you need to reach me or would like to reach me after this talk, feel free to. That's my email and my phone number at the bottom. Or you can just come and see me in person in Paris. This is just a little review of the abstract for my talk today. Rather than reading this all to you, I think you've probably read it, and I wanted to make sure it was in the slides. So a few key points are, in my view, to achieve business agility, the organization needs to be designed appropriately. And as a LESS coach and trainer, we do organizational design as part of our transformation effort. Some other approaches don't change the organizational design, and it's certainly easier not to do it. When you do it, you usually need some permission from the top down, as well as understanding about why you would do it. So I always involve senior executive management in transformation work. I do both bottom-up and top-down alignment. It's very important to me to not have a wishful thinking, this will solve everything mindset coming from top management. To oversell Agile, it's not a good idea. And on the other hand, you need to have the necessary support from upper management for all of the problems that teams will encounter that are probably not controllable at their level. One of the things in the organization that I coach involves new and revised roles and responsibilities at many levels. So I don't forget about middle and senior management, and I don't forget about teams and developers. I try to keep everyone in mind. And I usually do this as a team with other coaches, as in the previous example at Alcatel-Lucent. I think in that case, there were 35 coaches working around the world, so it was quite a big transformation. What I found as a success factor for business agility is involving the business, of course, and involving the management in a way that they are engaged and understand that they have to set a good example including making it okay to fail, and including showing that they are themselves learning, open to learning, and able to listen. Just a brief aside is I'm reminded by a wonderful talk by Linda Rising, who is speaking next at Agile 2012, about children and two types of upbringing and how that reflects throughout the lives of a person, the life of a person, as to whether they take risks and are willing to continue learning, or whether they avoid risks as a perfectionist might do. And I won't go into more detail about that, but if you're interested, ask Linda. It was a fantastic talk. I'm going to focus today on some personal experience and sharing experience with you rather than a lot of theory. So let's talk about business agility. This is a definition I came up with. I don't know if you'll agree, but for me, business agility is the ability to innovate and to adapt quickly and effectively to changing customer needs. It's customer-centric by definition. If I think about a lot of organizations I've worked with and a lot that you know or may currently work inside, they're often organized a little bit like this. So you see department heads that are experts of a particular skill, requirements management, application development, database development, frameworks of some type, or UX. And they have a hierarchical relationship to a manager who has a hierarchical relationship to another manager, and so on and so forth. When customer value wants to be produced, it's usually through a project, and the project has a beginning and an end, and the project needs to have people working in it. And those people come from these different departments. Usually, getting those people requires the project manager to talk to the different department heads and see who's available, bring people together for the project, and then disband them afterwards. If you're trying to create long-lasting business agility, you really don't want to do that. You don't want to get people together, have them go through that steep learning curve of getting to know each other, trust each other, and do some amazing stuff together, and then pull them apart again just to go on to something else. They lose all of that team level knowledge and business knowledge that they gained together. And so I think the answer to the question here is that it is not a customer-centric organization. The kind of organization that I suggest for business agility is to organize by customer value. So that means that individuals have a relationship and connection to customer value. They can imagine themselves being the customer, and the organization can help them do that through various kinds of walking in the shoes of the customer, experiencing the customer pain points, listening to customer service, and so on, and also at the level of the team. So when I refer to a team, I consider it to be a well-functioning, cohesive team with a common goal, a common way of working, where one person supports the other, and together they succeed or fail. But it's really a team. The kind of teams I like to suggest and to help construct and support are very long-lasting teams, like families. These families are not in isolation. They need to work together. But I try to optimize around the team and not the individual. It isn't to say the individual isn't important, but the complexity of today's world for most of our software development challenges is so high that individuals alone are not able to solve problems. They have to work in teams. If you like teamwork or if you don't, it's still a fact that teams are necessary to solve the problems we have today. The organizational structure in most organizations, like the slide we saw before, has not been designed with customer value in mind. It's been designed with competency in mind. And so we need to change that to become a agile business agility focused company. Communities are important, and communities can be a way to retain that expertise, the center of competence that prior departmental organization might have achieved. I won't talk too much more about structure at the moment, and a little bit more about teams. So in teams, I think of them as being dedicated, cross-component, cross-functional, co-located, long-lived, and perhaps most importantly, customer-centric. Teams need to be able to directly communicate with customers. This also comes back to reviewing and revising roles and responsibilities. In France, where I live, there is a role in most companies that build software called an MOA. And an MOA is the person who is the intermediary between the team and the customer. And there may be several layers of MOAs between the team and the customer. And the consequence is that the team may not really trust the MOA and doesn't really feel the customer's pain. So this is something to simplify, in my view, to create a business agility. Remove intermediaries or keep them as coaches to facilitate direct contact, not to hand off information to. Here's some concrete examples. These are all from clients I've worked with in the last 2 years, and there are many more, but these 4 I wanted to mention quickly and then do a deep dive on one of them. So one example of business agility that I'd like to mention is a fintech company, financial technology company. They develop a payment platform, and they've been challenging PayPal quite effectively. I worked with them in several countries and several different groups. One of the larger ones in Poland, had 100-some developers working for them. They were a pretty healthy business, but they had probably become a little too large for what they were really doing, and the satisfaction of employees wasn't that high. So we assessed their satisfaction levels, we assessed customer satisfaction levels, and we changed the organization quite significantly. We co-located people in a single site on a single couple of floors in a nice new building so they could directly communicate. We brought sales and marketing in direct contact with developers on a regular basis so that people would understand what were people experiencing with their products. And we implemented a single product backlog for all the teams with a single overall product owner. And the reason for this, which is recommended by Les, large-scale Scrum, of which I'm a trainer, is that you can optimize the whole by having a single list. If you have multiple lists and they all have a top priority, you don't really know what is the top priority across all those lists. It's local sub-optimization. So if you're trying to become agile on a business level, you need to be able to have the most important customer need addressed by as many teams as is needed to respond quickly. In this case, we had done that, and the sales team identified a business opportunity that required a fast response, and the product owner was able to turn around in one day items in the product backlog that could be addressed within the next week. And the company was much faster than the competition and was able to secure this new business. So that, to me, was possible because the structure had changed, as well as the practices to work as a whole. The second example is a telecom equipment provider. They make and sell equipment to carriers that you know for making phone calls. In this case, they had a long-term contract with a key German client, and Huawei was threatening that with lower prices and greater promises of features. Because the client decided to reorganize to be customer-centric, and because they had a single product owner over hundreds and hundreds of developers, they were able to shift priorities quickly after a very important conversation with the key customer. This conversation was in the middle of a development period that was intended to be finished in 3 months, and they realized they wouldn't be able to finish it. Rather than just hiding, expecting that they'd be making a penalty payment and maybe lose the customer, they opened the kimono, so to speak. They talked directly to the customer, and lo and behold, the customer actually didn't need a couple of the features that they'd specified. They agreed to drop them. The telecom equipment provider was able to make the date by dropping some features, and they kept the customer. If they hadn't had a single backlog and hadn't been oriented towards business in their development process, I don't think they would have succeeded that way. The third example is an automotive company that scaled up a large initiative to build autonomous driving. and I've worked with several of them. So if you check my LinkedIn page, you'll see more than one name. And this company decided to reorganize, again, hundreds of developers into long-lived, cross-functional, customer-centric teams. They flattened the structure so that senior management can communicate directly with teams much more efficiently, and so that teams had much greater autonomy in adapting to the needs of their development effort. That's been a very significant and interesting example to me in an industry that has been around for a while and is being challenged by Silicon Valley startups like Elon Musk's company. Hopefully you own some shares in that. It's been doing pretty well lately, Tesla. And I think that Europe can challenge Silicon Valley, and it's important to consider some of the success factors. We don't know it all, and we have to listen to customers frequently to have higher business agility. And that's possible when you have a potentially shippable product increment every 2 weeks, and you can get direct feedback. In this example, another case of customer centrism is that every sprint, developers, along with management, would get into a car that had been loaded up with the most recent autonomous driving software, so every 2 weeks, and they would drive it and test it together. It wasn't building step by step something for down the tunnel would finally be delivered. It was very iterative development at a very large scale. A fourth example, and the one I'm going to go into more detail about, is Flixbus, a company that you might know with the green and orange buses. They haven't been probably as busy lately with COVID, but they've been growing very quickly. And I worked with them in a lot of detail as well, and I'll go into a little bit more detail. But they achieved very fast time to market and are partly the size that they are today because of their changes, their customer centrism and business agility. So let's go into a little bit more detail with that company. And I thank you to Flixbus and one of their founders who's allowed me to share this content with you. It's a very transparent and collaborative company, and not all companies are happy to be identified in conferences. So FlixTech is a department of Flixbus that I was working with primarily. And at this company, maybe backing up a step, it was not a less adoption. It was a roll your own less agile adoption that included some ideas from less, some ideas from Spotify, some ideas from DevOps and from other sources. And it involved basically deconstructing the management structure from a department with several different levels of hierarchy. One of the actions was that the direct reports to the CTO all gave up direct hierarchical responsibility and became more of a coaching posture. Communities were formed, and the business that had become fairly disaligned with IT was very intentionally aligned down to the level of teams. And business sponsors were identified from the business side that would align with one or more teams. And product owners were tightly coupling the business and the team members to understand changing requirements and to create higher business agility. This culminated in an event called a self-design event. It's something that is used in less, and I think some other people also use this. It's when teams are formed by individuals deciding who they're going to work with. And this is some reasons for why FlixTech decided to do it. The first reason was business value focused. They wanted the teams to be very focused on the business. The second one was to create great technology, and the third was to foster self-organization. These things may seem quite unrelated, but they're not. So if you're trying to become quickly responsive to changing business needs, it means you need to have a high level of tacit knowledge on the level of the team. The team can quickly learn and understand what the business needs, and it reduces the overhead needed for management that is directive, allowing teams to be more self-determining. The particular technique here is, I think, extremely interesting, and frankly, one of the things that I do that brings the most joy to people that I can think of. And there are some reasons for that. You get to work on what you want to. You get to work with whom you want to, and you get to work how you want to. And most people appreciate that amount of freedom. On the other hand, it's not total anarchy or chaos, because the time that goes into designing the blueprint for the new organization is significant, and it's done with management until there's a clear understanding of what organization design we're trying to implement. On the day of the actual design, there are several iterations, 3 iterations, and you set up a room. In this case, it was a ballroom in a hotel that was 800 square meters with 170 people to produce 30 new teams. And we had a setup of chairs around the room, little semicircles of chairs, one for each team with a flip chart. And each team understood the mission of the team and where they would be serving, what their business alignment would be initially anyway, and what would the cross-functionality constraints be on the team. Each person assesses themselves and can be coached in that if they need to identify their skills. And the teams that are formed then are by people who want to work together and who also have the well-rounded set of skills needed to build a new product. It's pretty clear to everyone involved that it won't necessarily work. The management has given permission for people to decide what to work on and with whom, but they reserve the right to approve or disapprove. And these are the 3 possible outcomes. We got option A, and every time I've done it, I've gotten option A or B. I've never had a epic fail, option C, but it's important to realize that it is possible, but it might not work. So within a day, we went from departments to new teams, 29 new teams that are still, by and large, working well together 3 years later. And that's, for me, a very successful outcome and has created a higher business agility for Flixbus. So how do we help to achieve these outcomes? I'm speaking of myself and others, other coaches that I've worked with. It's not us who's doing it, first of all. It's the customer who's doing it. You're there to help them. You're not there to be in charge. So I help the management make an informed decision to change. I asked good questions, I think, and they thought about it, realized the costs, the benefits, the risks, and they understood that it wouldn't just happen for them with coaches, but they would have to be very involved. The existing silos are removed in the organization, and a new blueprint is created for customer-centric structures. And this may take some time. You shouldn't rush it. Leadership changes. This doesn't happen automatically. So it's partly by doing and partly by learning, by being taught. But you shouldn't just take them to a training and think that's all there is to it. There's a lot of coaching involved. One pattern I've found that is pretty good, working with another client in automotive, I can say Mercedes-Benz, was that we did a workshop series for senior management of 3 hours over a few months, once every couple of weeks. And that gave them time to think about the theory, also fit it into their schedule, and also learn over a longer period of time. And it takes time to change behaviors and mindsets. So be patient. Teams are reformed normally. I've just talked about a good way to do that. And communities are important. I talked about that a little bit earlier. People still want to master their skills, and they need cohorts who have the similar skills. Let's say you're a business analyst or a Java dev. You probably want to have some time with other experts in your field, and communities are great for that. So how would you get started if you wanted to either coach or in your own organization change to become better at business agility? The first step is to educate leaders and seek informed consent to change. What I mean by that is that you go into it with your eyes wide open, and you have the option to say no or to say yes. You don't have to do it. I think probably more than half the companies who I talk to are not actually ready to change, so timing is important. They're too busy, they don't really have time to learn. So I try to make sure they know that it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to take time and money, and you have to be motivated and involved. And if not, I suggest maybe waiting for another time. So You open up a volunteer opt-in process for change, and this is very important. When people are told they have to start working in another way or do something other than what they thought they should be doing, they may not like that. So it's better and easier, certainly, to start with the group who are volunteers and they know what it's involving and they want to do it. And you create and educate the overall product owner and the product management supporting that overall product owner. The selection of an overall product owner is very important, in particular in the framework I often refer to, large-scale Scrum, because we have removed a lot of layers of hierarchy, and that person is, you could say, the single throat to choke, the person responsible overall for satisfying customer need. Business agility requires leadership, and this role is a very important one. They need to be supported by top management. You need to educate everyone then in the target group for change and remove or soften silos. Sometimes change can be progressive and you begin with one group and you extend to other groups. If you know the definition of done and it's something that you expand, it may require adding additional skills, which means absorbing additional departments over time. Create appropriately structured client-centric teams like we've talked about. Agreed that only the product owner gives work to the team. So this is a big change for technical managers who might have been used to directing their staff. They won't be doing that anymore. They'll be coaching and mentoring, but it's the product owner who will be setting priorities with input, but ultimately that's the final say. And then project managers who try to keep them away from the teams. A different talk, I'm sure you've heard about product versus project orientation, so I won't go into more detail about that concept right now. One of the things to teach is systems thinking, and systems thinking is important. What we're looking at here is a causal loop diagram. It's something I always train people at every level when I coach to help understand the overall system that they work in. It reduces conflict, increases collaboration by creating higher alignment within an organization. That organization can respond more quickly to customer need. It's also something that you can do with a customer, in particular if you're having difficulty and you have a kind of wicked problem. Systems thinking can help you reach a mutual understanding of it. This is something you do at a whiteboard or on Miro or Mural. It's not something that you produce and then show somebody, except if you're doing a training, but you pretty quickly go into real-world experience. This is another technique, specific technique. I mentioned the importance for leadership to become transparent and vulnerable. And this technique is one that I developed at the same Agile conference when I saw Linda's talk in 2012. The technique is around servant leadership, and it begins with people considering their past and the leader that most impacted them and helped them, and alternatively the one that most hurt them and maybe scarred them. And each person describes what are the key words that represent those feelings, and they post them on a large figure of a human on the wall and discuss together in small groups what does good leadership look like and what does bad leadership look like. And this is a fairly easy thing to do and fairly satisfying. But I then turn to create more vulnerability and personal change. I turn the question to the participants, and I do this with executive teams and team members alike. Think now about yourself, and what's the one thing you see on the great leader image that you don't find in yourself that you'd like to add, and tell the people about it, or choose someone to confide in and tell them what you're going to try to begin doing. And alternatively, on the pink post-its on the least favorite leader, what's something that you unfortunately identify in yourself that you're going to stop doing? And then share that also to be vulnerable. I don't require it, I just suggest it. And I find over half the people who I've done this with, and I've done it many times, are willing to share that publicly with their cohorts in the comfort of their team. I find this to be a very high impact way to create change in organizations. This is just a quick reminder of the kinds of coaching that I think are needed to help create business agility. I wouldn't consider it to be only the business side or only the technical side, but overall organizational team and technical coaching. I chose to show you this slide briefly just to show the dotted blue line at the bottom, the connection between teams and customers. The product owner in the center here and the Scrum Master concerned with the overall system is trying to increase and maintain a flow of communication in all these relationships. And her relationship is to the overall system. So the product owner facilitates direct contact. And a final secret to business agility is it increased trust. So just talk. It's underutilized. That's all I have, and I want to turn it over to questions. I hope that my timing is about right. So.
Okay, this has been very interesting, and it's very interesting to compare experiences and see kind of the same things that work that worked for us when we did the transformations. There's one question that I'd like to ask regarding technical leadership, because I often find that you start from these kind of organizing teams and all that, but then, especially in software development companies, you often hit a wall when it comes to switching to the technical side. So, what are your experiences in this area?
It's a very good question, and I've seen this happen also. So specifically around technical leadership, the simple and maybe a little naive answer would be, well, the teams will make their own decisions technically. And you don't need a CTO or a VP of engineering or some similar role. And what I found is it really depends on the organization and the level of collaboration between teams and how well they're facilitated. But technical decision making is important, and there needs to be some commonality to certain decisions. I'm thinking about a talk I heard in Agile India in 2012 about the about anarchistic development. And Fred George, who was the author of that talk, doesn't believe that there needed to be any direction technically. But that's a pretty much of an outlier. It's an interesting idea, but I haven't found it that often to be the case. People are used to being directed technically, and they do need to make technical decisions. And workshops help, and if they're well facilitated, they help. But the key point would be you need leadership, and it doesn't need to be hierarchical, but it needs to be recognized. And so what I do is I coach future leaders and current leaders, or either hierarchical or just mindset leaders, to become better at persuasion, better at negotiation. In some cases, I might craft a regular process where these technical leaders advise product owners on priorities and are respected and considered in that process. In some cases, I might make a product roadmap with a swim lane for technology efforts to, for example, support refactoring and removal of technical debt, even though it may not be coming from the product owner's perspective. It's one of the learning opportunities that is important. So I've also found in some organizations that an agile-minded, collaborative, and enabling manager who also has authority to make technical decisions can be useful. That person needs to, of course, respect the people who may know more than he or she does, who are more hands-on. And that person, in my opinion, should probably also be hands-on. Architects, I've seen more dysfunction than utility in people that primarily produce architecture and don't actually understand what they're talking about technically.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's something we noticed as well, that you need to involve leaders, you need to prepare them to take this role and so on. And another thing that I noticed in transformations that I've been involved with, and particularly some of the examples that you give, I think also fit, like things from automotive or telecom, Often you are dealing with equipment that can be expensive, and then it's quite hard to create kind of a testing platform or a platform where you can play, because many times it's hard to sell this idea of you need to buy more equipment, I don't know, $10,000 machine or $100,000 machine for this. Have you seen this kind of challenges?
Yes, I have it. And there's a great question to ask your client in this case, or the customer in this case, which is, do you know how much a sprint costs you? How much are you spending on a sprint? And frequently they don't know. They don't realize that, they consider hardware to be an expense, but they kind of forget about the inefficiency of people who are waiting an hour or an hour and a half for a build to complete. And they don't realize the massive amount of money they're losing from that, let alone being much less reactive and with slower flow. Sometimes another company I worked with had a very sales marketing oriented CEO who wasn't too interested in technology. Unfortunately, the CTO who was hired was very persuasive and capable, and he had to use basically a big hammer in the annual budget meeting and convince them that 30% of the budget over the next year would be used for technical debt or technical initiatives only. So it's sort of like busing in the U.S. during the civil rights movement. Separating people into the front and the back of the bus is a terrible way to deal with racial tensions, but it's perhaps better than murder. So I'd rather not divide the backlog into two pieces. I'd rather have one, and I'd rather have respect and the importance of technical investment be well understood. And there's the other side of it as well. Sometimes the technical side is so adamant in trying to get more budget for what they consider to be important that they don't consider that they're about to go out of business as a company. And if they don't start shipping features, even if they aren't that great, they won't have any money to spend. So there's a happy medium, and I think this just talk metaphor is perhaps the best advice. It really depends on the situation, and you need to put things on the table. An interactive roadmap workshop is a great way to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that's
You need enough time, undistracted time, FaceTime.
yeah, it can be very useful of understanding the actual needs and prioritizing them based on the median, as you said. Um, and there's
Yeah, just
also,
a quick
please.
comment on that. From working in Bucharest, actually, was a company there that develops a fintech platform that had competing market needs from CEOs. The way they were organized by country, they had a CEO, and each CEO wanted their features and no other features. And it was a terrible problem for the product owner because there's always someone that would hate you and it would escalate above you somehow to get their thing. And we got these people all together in a workshop, and they managed to agree with trade-offs using buy a feature game and innovation game to agree with the constrained budget. What would they do and what would they not do? And it was so effective that it became a regular, recurring process every 6 weeks. And we did it online in order to keep the stakeholders aligned. Sorry, that was a little more than you asked for.
No, it's very interesting. Another thing that I noticed, one pattern is sometimes companies split kind of in two, and they have kind of core teams that deliver APIs and services to the rest of the team, and then they have customer-oriented teams who deliver business value built on top of those core services. And then it's often quite hard for the core services teams to prioritize, because you get different requests from different types of
Yeah.
consumers. And this is a challenge that's also, I'd be interested in your experiences on that.
Yeah, one experience is I've used different patterns. I've experimented with different patterns for that problem, which is recurrent. So one pattern is internal open source, and you don't have these separate departments creating separate APIs, and people qualify progressively, perhaps, to keep clean code, to work on certain repositories or features, or they work in pairs or mobbing to maintain quality. But often that falls down somewhat, and there are these specialized teams working on APIs that are not directly in contact with customer stakeholders. So you could consider the other teams to be a proxy for the customer need. And a way to do that mechanically is to create a weighted sum of the relative importance for each team to give a total nominal value. And then to optimize it a bit further, you could take the total optimized value divided by the cost, and it looks a little bit then like uh, shortest weighted job first or cost of delay related prioritization. But I would again do this on a recurrent basis in the same phase cycle of the sprint. So, and it does add complexity that ideally you could avoid by just having people work on it directly. But it is a way to do it, and I've tried it. It's worked, but it's been a little bit more overhead than a simpler solution. I think that this has happened also with data science becoming prevalent and some other newer technologies, AI and other machine learning, that these groups are focused on a technology rather than a business need. And so they tend to be hard to find people, and they're then specialized into groups that do only that. It's sort of like we don't learn from the past. It's like recreating the back end and front end teams, or recreating the database administrator role, except it has a sexy new name. It's data science or something else. I'd much rather, probably it's clear, but I'd much rather suggest that these skills be integrated into a broader number of feature teams, and that everyone be learning and be T-shaped with recognition through communities of special skill, and not expecting that everyone will be the same or that every team will be the same, but that we want to build in some redundancy and some additional capacity to create, again, business agility. If you have only a fixed amount of each skill, you better hope that the ratio of need is in direct proportion to the skill you have, because otherwise you'll be wasting energy. So I like the multi-learning.
And one last question. How important is infrastructure automation to enable business agility?
Essential. Very important, I would say. Very important. And I think the reason that DevOps and infrastructure as a service and other ideas that have become more and more prevalent, it's because of this recognition. You can have great ideas from business agility, but if they never run well in operations or can't be deployed seamlessly, then you may lose the value.
All right. So this is all the time we had for questions. It's been a very interesting session.
Thank you very much.
Real examples, which is always good, and with real techniques. We will take a 15 minutes break and come back with Linda Rising. Thank you.
Okay. Well, have a nice rest of the evening. I'll talk to you later. I'm looking forward to Linda's talk. For everyone else out there, I hope you tune in. It'll be fantastic, I'm sure.
Okay.
Hi, Linda, remotely. Bye.
Bye.